Welcome to Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez. I'm so glad we are back with another episode of Don't Fuck This Up. This week's guest spent years creating marketing magic at Twitter, The Wing, and BET. She's a confidence coach, tarot practitioner, the founder of the Girl Mob, and hot off the heels of a year-long sabbatical. It's Yari Blanco. Yari, welcome to Don't Fuck This Up.
Lauren, thank you for having me. So excited to be one of your guests.
It's really great to have you here. And I mean, just knowing that you've been in so many different spaces and you've been through so many transformations, both individually in your career. I mean, so exciting. Even coming from New York to LA. I mean, that's a big move too. Before we get into all that, how are you doing?
I am doing good. I am feeling really grounded at the moment. I'm feeling, I practice gratitude every day, but I'm always in deep gratitude for the things that I do have. And I'm also feeling really excited about this year and like just rolling up my sleeves and getting some shit done. So
I love that approach. And, I saw, recently on your social that you shared that you went home to the Dominican Republic to visit with family. And you had some really poignant thoughts on aging that I thought were just really special, just around kind of like family and appreciation and coming full circle. I feel like, you mentioned you start each day with gratitude, but I also feel like you're really in the zone on reflection.
I'm always on reflection mode. And before, when I was younger, meaning in my 20s, I think I did it more around like my birthday and like the end of the year, which I would guess that a lot of people do, right? Because it's like in your face. It's like a big turning moment. But as I've gotten into my 30s and now I'm 37, I am in constant practice of being reflective of the things that I'm interacting with, the things that are coming up for me, the things that I'm observing. And again, I think it ties back into like being able to have gratitude and also like something that I know we'll talk about in this episode, like pivoting and just being connected to self.
Yeah. Yeah. I think knowing where we come from is such an important piece of also knowing where we're headed, or when we don't know where we're headed, we can kind of lean back on our roots and who we are and who we were. And I find, I don't have a lot of people in my life who have known me for, even my entire adult life. I have a couple people that have known me since like I was like 18 or like, worse, 16 or something. And then, I have some family members, of course, but the people who like really know your guts, there's something really, it's humbling for sure. Cause they can be like, remember when you had braces? I'm like, let's not. But also there's the other side of it where they're like, I've seen you transform. I've seen you go through these changes and you've done it so many times. Why wouldn't you do it this time? And I always find that to be sometimes what I need to hear, when, you're in those moments of transition and pivot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I actually had a girlfriend of mine, shout out to Teresa Simpson, because I love her. I mean, I love all my girlfriend. But she sent me this really beautiful voice note yesterday. She was doing her daily walk and she was like, I just want to say, she was listening to an episode of, I think, a Jay Shetty podcast, and he was talking to Esther Perel, and she was saying how people who remain like joyful in dating and in life pursuits, despite of like the things that come up, the difficult challenges that come up for them, are like really special people. And Teresa sent me this voice note talking about that. And she was like, I just admire you so much because it's not resiliency, is like, there's an eternal optimism in you, both in dating and in the way that you approach life, even when things feel like you're just falling through the void and you're like, I don't know when this is going to stop. And, shout out to girlfriends. Like, I just felt very seen in that moment. So, going back to what you said, it's very humbling, but it's also, it feels like a warm hug when somebody like is able to see you and the growth that you've had. And that for me is like just so special in interpersonal relationships.
It's really beautiful just to think about like that, moment of being seen. I think that's something that, hopefully we get to experience in different parts of our lives, whether that's romantic relationships, friendships, in our career environments. And you definitely feel it when you're not, when people don't get you or when you're not around your people and you're like, hello, is anybody there? Like, I'm trying to do this thing. Am I falling into the void? And so, yeah, like it really brings you back to poetry normal, I'll say. It's interesting you mentioned dating and in life. I think there's like a lot of parallels between dating and career. Like I often draw them myself as a coach, and I'm working with people and I'm like, well, think about this interview as like a first date, maybe you've been texting for a bit, but like you're about to go on. Not putting you on blast in any way, but like you really have been open about having some really interesting experiences. You've been on sabbatical for the last year and you talked a little bit about like the differences of like you went to Europe and you went on dates there. What are some of like your biggest, and I would love to link your Substack too, because I think you have such a beautiful way of writing about your experiences. Like I feel like I'm there. It's very transportive.
Thank you.
But what would you say? You're welcome. What would you say is some of like the biggest takeaways of those experiences that you're carrying through, not just, dates and romance, which are fun too, but even into like the rest of your life?
Ooh, I think so. Being in sabbatical for a year was partially something that I planned. I wanted to go away and live somewhere else. That's something that I've wanted to do for quite some time. And it's funny, there's this interview with Jill Scott where she's like, artists, creatives need to go live life in order to be able to be creative and to share back with the world, right? And so like, go cook a meal, go for a walk, go travel somewhere, make love, have a breakup. Like, if you are not living, then you can't really, like, what are you really talking about? And so I feel that I am in constant pursuit of that, of like living to the fullest in the most boldest, most authentic way that I possibly can. And sometimes that's just me sitting on my sofa and watching TV or reading a book. So with the sabbatical, partially planned it in terms of like the travels that I wanted to do, but I also didn't give myself a timeline of like, okay, at month 4, this needs to stop and you need to find work again. You need to get back to corporate. It was kind of like, I'm giving myself full permission and carte blanche to do whatever I want at my own pace. And so I would say that one of the things that I've learned through the sabbatical is to really tap into like my own internal rhythm and like to really learn to really listen to when my body is like yes and no, right or left. And in order to do that, I already was someone, going back to what you said earlier, like I'm already someone that is very reflective, and being in LA taught me to be better at sitting with myself. And going to a different country, which the majority of the time I made Madrid my home base, not knowing anybody there, is like another level of sitting with yourself.
I love
right? That. So the second thing I would say that I learned was like really being okay with the unknown, which is something that none of us are very good at. It feels really scary. And so the third thing that it taught me, or that it made me focus more on, was to trust. So again, there's like listening to my own pace and not being caught up with the people around me. Learning a new level of like sitting with myself in a place where like, I don't know the rules here. I don't know the people here. But not seeing it as like, as constricting, seeing that as so liberating. Like I get to make up whoever I want. And I don't have to be like Yari Blanco of New York or Yari Blanco of LA. I get to be Yari Blanco of Madrid, Yari Blanco of Paris. And there was so much play that came from that. That was so lovely. And that allowed me to trust, to be more trusting, I should say, of being okay with like the unknown. Like, I don't know what tomorrow's going to look like, and I hope to continue to foster those things and to nourish those things, because the truth is that like all of life is unknown. We're just making it up as you go. And I think this idea, something that constantly came up in my therapy with my therapist, was this idea of like control and controlling for the sake of safety. And, you know, there's ways that you can control things, sure, like the place that you live, the job you say yes to. But overall, like we're kind of like, it's a free fall. Like life really is a free fall.
Yeah.
And so like doing the sabbatical just pushed me further into accepting that and like trusting that. And that's not to say that I haven't had days or moments or weeks where I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, it doesn't mean that I don't feel fear or like I feel scared, but it does mean that like whenever those things come up for me, one, I'm practicing being the observer in my thoughts and in my feelings, showing myself compassion. And two, I can now quietly, you know, and it is my intuition, quietly remind myself or listen to myself and be like, hey, that's okay. Like, we're going to be okay. You know, things always work out. They might not work out in the way that you envisioned it, but if you just let go a little bit, you'll see that there's so many other possibilities here. So yeah, the sabbatical has been like a big trust fall exercise for me with, as I say, source, with the universe. And there's been so many learnings, which I read about in my self-sag, but also there's been so much like unlocking of potential and like of like freedom, you know, that I've been able to grant myself on a spiritual and mental level, that I just feel, I'm going to say it again, but I just feel like deep gratitude for like Jadi of the past, who saved her money and was able to like grant herself this, and Jadi of the past, who, meaning like last year, who like continued to walk towards the thing that scared her the most whenever that came up versus running away from it. And Jadi of the present, who continues to try to practice those things that we've learned, and like, how do we commit to them for the rest of our life?
Yeah. That's so beautiful. I just want to like pause and appreciate just how open, you know, your response was to that. And I think it really shows, you know, there's these kind of clarifying events that happen in our lives, you know, when things happen for me, like having, you know, a kid, I had no idea how much that would shake things up, everything from friendships to like, you know, all of the things, career, like all of it, like all the houses shook, shook it to its core, you know, and I think that it is, yeah. And other things too. I mean, you know, I got laid off before, you know, I went through, you know, a big move, you know, getting married was like a really exciting, cool change. I didn't think it would feel different. It totally felt different. Like all of those things were really interesting. You know, one thing I, you know, remember reading in your, you know, kind of roundup, I think you called it a syllabus for the year, for last year. And yeah. And you talked about friend breakups. And, you know, I want to just touch on that because I think that's something that, you know, has been unfortunately an experience that is a shared experience. I think especially with other women that, you know, I speak with. And I think it's also something that many people go through when they feel super isolated, because the person that you'd normally talk to about it is that person who you just went through that friend breakup with. Can you just like share your thoughts and, you know, commentary, you know, and if you don't want to talk too specifically, it's totally okay. But, you know, just kind of what that experience has been like for you, and perhaps like what you moved, you know, toward when you were going through that.
It is a big topic. I think it's funny because I see it being written more about, and I'm like, yeah, we're all like 34 to 42, and everyone's like having a similar experience here, which that in of itself gives me comfort, because it's not just like you dealing with this thing. For context for the audience, I dealt with 4 friendship breakups in 1 year. So let's just say 1 a quarter. And I was just like, by the third one, I was like, what is happening? Like, time out, because I haven't even recovered from the first one. And they were all for different reasons, and they were all friends that I had for different lengths of times and different dynamics. And some of them were with women and some of them were with men. So it wasn't just like only women. And I felt like I was put through like the fire. It was like I somehow signed up for an advanced course in dealing with this or like working through this. And I don't think that there is enough advice in the world to help prepare anybody for dealing with it because every relationship is different. You know, every relationship has different context. What I will say, two things. One is in all the relationships, I tried to have a conversation with folks. Some of them we did have conversations and it just landed with like, this is just not the best time for us to be in friendship with each other. So I don't believe that like you have a friendship with someone, you get upset and then you just like stop talking to each other. That for me is really triggering because that brings up a like child wound for me because my family, that's part of like the thing that my family did growing up where like you somehow did something to somebody and that you were not probably aware of. And then the person will stop talking to you for like 8 months. And you were just like, okay, I guess all of us have to exist with you and I not talking to each other at home. And that for me is just like,
I wish I could say I didn't relate to that, but I do.
I would like for nobody to relate to that. But I feel like that's probably, again, a common experience for people. And I think that's probably where a lot of us people pleasing people come from because you're like, oh my God, how do I fix this thing? And thankfully I've like unlearned that, which is really uncomfortable because your default is to like figure it out and fix a thing. But it's like, it's not for me to fix, it's for us to fix if you're interested in that. So I don't do just like, I'm not going to talk to you. If you were an important person in my life, whether that was for a year or 17 years or 22 years, a conversation or multiple conversations should be had. And
yeah,
so I tried that and it just was not, you know, it did not work. There was a clip I just saw of an interview on a podcast with, I think her name is Cleo Soul. And she was talking about soul contracts. And I love the way she put it. I've heard of this. I'm very much into like the esoteric and I've heard of, you know, soul contracts. But she was saying how soul contracts could be really short or really long. And sometimes when you are in a long soul contract with somebody, let's say with your parents, you, as you grow as a person, you like renew this contract and the terms of the contract. And I thought that was really interesting to like think of in friendships, right? Because sometimes we're like, well, fuck, why did this just like end like this? This feels, even if it's been happening for a while, it still feels abrupt. It's a breakup.
Yeah.
There's nothing fun about a breakup. Even if you feel liberated, which you know, sometimes that's how you feel, it's still painful and sad. You have to like mourn the death of something that meant something to you for a really long time. So like there is not enough strategic tactics that I can give you. And I don't mean you personally, I mean like to anyone that's listening, to be able to like work through it in a way that you're going to come out immediately feeling good about it. It just, I did not experience that.
Yeah. I think it's really nonlinear too.
Yeah, no, it's not. And I think even if like the experience was toxic, right? Let's say the person that you were in friendship with like caused you harm. That's still painful. Even if you're like good riddance, but you're still really sad about that. So there has to be like time for that to process that. And going back to my experience with sabbatical versus here in the US, like we are always on the go here. Like it's not, you just never, people don't make time to like pause. Another thing I really hunkered down on in my sabbatical. And honestly, in the past few years, since the pandemic, since 2020, like there's so much power in pausing. And so to tie back into the friendship stuff is like, let me pause. Like what is coming up for me? Like what is no longer okay for me to be dealing with in this relationship? How do I bring this up in a constructive way? And then ultimately, like, what is the outcome? Like, if we are not in friendship, am I going to miss this person? Like, what, you know, and in my Substack, I wrote about friendships, right? And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I wrote about was different types of friendships and how, ultimately, like what I'm in search of and what I have with the friends that I've maintained is that of a friendship of virtue where we can challenge each other, where we can bring things up and be like, hey, that hurt my feelings,
Yeah.
or that makes me uncomfortable, or like, I know we've functioned in this way for a really long time, but it actually no longer works for me. And like, how do we move through that, even if it's really
Yeah.
uncomfortable for both of us? And then the second thing I was going to say about friendships that I learned through a dating experience, it was like two things were happening. It was like a friendship fallout, a breakup was happening, and like I was seeing somebody and things just were not working out. And so it was very interesting that like one taught me about the other. And that is that
Mm-hmm.
often when we are in breakups with people, friendship or romantic, we very quickly make ourselves the victim in the situation. And with this guy, there was a lot of like misunderstandings happening via text, via voice note, as it does. And at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, this thing was happening with a friend, and I paused, and I was like, oh shit, this friend does not want to have a conversation with me. They assume that they have all the information that they need. They have chosen to no longer be friends with me, which is, I respect your boundaries. If that's a boundary you want, I respect that. But they get to be the hero or the victim in their own story. What happens when you open the door to have a conversation with that other person is that you don't get to just make up the role that you played there. And you have to hold yourself accountable to the role that you actually played, as does the other person, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And so with this guy,
Yeah.
I ended up having a conversation with him. And for me, it was just really, really important to make sure that I was not making up the story about him in my head. Because how unfair was that to him and to the moments that we shared together? And what ended up happening was that, like, we both said what we had to say. There was not just acknowledgement, but accountability and apologies. And it was like, wow, okay, cool. Like, I understand you differently. And I'm so glad that we had this conversation. After that call, I was like, I'm ready to do cartwheels in the street. Like, I just felt so joyful. It was like this thing had been like, taken off my chest. And so that was a really big pivot for me moving forward in terms of the way that I interact with people. Like, no, you don't just get to make up the story. Now my only caveat is in practicing discernment and in knowing yourself and in being tapped into your intuition, there will be people that you're like, yeah, this doesn't deserve a conversation. Like, I'm good.
Sure.
Like, you've already shown me who you are. There's been multiple interactions. Like, I'm okay. So, like, I'm not saying that every single time something happens, this is the thing, but I think that it is a, like, prompt to think about, is like, am I making up? Do I get to be the victim here and this person gets to be whatever I want them to be? Or do I have enough information here to be like, oh no, actually, like, the harm is being caused to me and I need to remove myself from this situation.
Listen, I think there's a lot there. And I think that, I think as naturally curious people want an answer for most things. But as humans, our nature is to write the dialogue and to write the story. If we don't have information, as an HR professional, I always tell, my clients, like, silence breeds insecurity. And if you can't share information, people are going to write their own dialogue. And it's
Absolutely.
the same thing with these, friendships or breakups or even like functioning good partnerships. Like,
Absolutely.
if you don't have communication, then the other person is just going to invent what's happening, for better or worse. And, hope for better, but usually for worse. And I think, even with, with professional situations, I've been fired before. I have been laid off before. And it's really easy we've all seen the LinkedIn post. We've all seen everyone, kind of shook to their core. My least favorite, I will say, are the like, survivor's guilt. I'll put that in air quotes,
Yeah.
posts of people who
That's
didn't
just
get
weird.
impacted, but they just want to talk about it. Cause it's like, I don't know. It's like when someone dies and all of a sudden everyone's like, they were my best friend. I'm like, well, that's really weird. Cause like, I didn't even know y'all knew each other anymore. Like, I'm sorry for what you're going through. But like with a company, I feel like, we were taught, I think in the like mid 2015 to 2019 pre-pandemic, there was this kind of attitude of like familial, creative environments, especially of like, we're a family, like we work this way. And obviously that's not true because it's your coworkers.
Yeah.
And so learning that the explanation may not always be there when things happen. And we can't control what happens to us or, as a people manager, like I couldn't control things that were happening to my teams in the past, things like that. What I could control was myself, my poise, hopefully I was able to navigate it and the ability to be there for other people, and to continue to choose to be vulnerable as a leader, which I think is very hard in these moments. But that is something that, I think learning those lessons in our personal lives, you do translate them over to the professional sector. I mean, you've been in a lot of unique environments. I definitely want to talk about that.
Yes.
I want to go back to like your early career because you started in the editorial space and you started out in a lot of different types of publications. What an interesting time. It was still sort of the heyday of editorial and actually publishing, which like, oh my gosh, RIP Pitchfork, right? The latest to bite the dust. But I mean, talk to me a little bit about kind of your entry point into that world. Was that something you always wanted to do? How did you even go in that direction?
Yeah, so as a kid, I wanted to be a fashion designer. And then my dreams were crushed. No, I mean, sort of, yeah. I interviewed for a couple schools and I didn't have the technicality in terms of the drawings, but I had like the designs in terms of the ideas and the colors. And so anyways, I was told maybe you should pursue fashion merchandising. And ultimately, once I got to college, I was like, oh my God, it'd be really cool to be a fashion editor someplace. Like that's something I would love to do. Fast forward to graduating in 2008, right when the economy had crashed. And I was just like most people at the time that had graduated were like, again, what the fuck is this? Like we are thousands of dollars in debt, et cetera. So I wasn't even expecting to land a job at a magazine. But again, it's not always how you envision it. Is like, sometimes it's just what it is. And I ended up getting a job at People en Español magazine, which was not a magazine that I read at all. Definitely something that my mom read. But I was like, this is my in to this world. It was in the Life building. So I would get in the elevator with like the women that worked at like Essence, and these women were so beautiful and dressed to the nines. And it wasn't in the editorial team, but I was like, I am a hustler. I'm from New York. I'm gonna get in. I was working on the sales side. I was an assistant for this woman who sold pharmaceutical ads. So the least sexy, there's
no fashion in pharmaceutical.
No, there really isn't. Also, it was so funny because she was on maternity leave. And so originally I had someone else that was covering for her as my boss. And people kept telling me like, when she comes back in, she is a tough lady. Like she is not fun to work for. And the first day she came in, she looked at me like out of Devil Wears Prada. She looked at me up and down. Mind you, it's not that she had style. She just was like a very buttoned up lady. Right. She looked at me up and down and was like, made a comment about what I was wearing. Like, alluding to the fact that it was maybe inappropriate, even though I wasn't like showing anything. I just was like a 22-year-old kid wearing sneakers and like a sweatshirt. I'm not front facing. Yeah. I'm here to like, book your stuff and print your things. Anyways, I will share that I ended up winning that lady over and she loved me so much. She like fought hard to keep me because I was a contractor, to keep me for as long as possible. And anyone that messed with me, she would bring them into the office and she would give them an earful. So, You could win people over, y'all.
I love that.
Anyways, so that was the entry point. I didn't end up working in editorial at all. Those people were not nice. I don't know if they're still there, but they were not kind to the non-editorial people. It was very cliquish, which for me, I was like, oh, I don't like
very
that.
elitist.
I just was like, oh yeah, no, I'm good. Like those are not my people. But I was cool with the marketing director, and I am a very curious person. And so I would always go into her office whenever I had like a moment, and I would just be like, oh, what are you working on now? And she was the one that really taught me how to put together like a deck and like what a pitch deck looked like. And like, shout out to Rachel Strauss, because she was really, really kind to me in that way. And that was my
it's incredible.
Really my entry point into marketing. And I was like, oh, this I like, this I get, this I can do. I could also do the editorial, but I was like, those are not my people. Like I could see that my people are here.
Yeah.
So that was my entry point. And then again, as a New Yorker, you just kind of like whoever you meet, if there's someone interesting, you follow up and you're kind of relentless about it. And so from there, I ended up working at the Latino Film Festival, which I genuinely think my year was like one of the best years that they had, and probably the last year that they had that was like just like absolutely phenomenal. And I knew that when you felt it, right? When you're just like, wow, this is really special. I imagine is what people who make music and are in a studio and they're like, this is going to be a bop. This is going to be a hit. This is going to last for decades. That was the energy at the festival. And I heard it from people that had been working for the festival for like anywhere from 5 to 10 years, where they were like, wow, it's just like seamless. The way that everybody was just like in synchronicity with each other, the films that we had, the brand partnerships that we had, the parties that we had, just like, it just was so magical. And that job was really special for me because it was such a small team. I would say like kind of like a startup, that if you believed in something enough and if you pitched it, they said yes. And so that was my entry point into using social media to like promote something. At the time it was Facebook, and I had pitched us having like our own post on the carpet, because they had never had that. And so I did like a call to action. People sent in their videos, but they had to do it through like our website. So it drove like traffic up. And then, so it became like a whole thing. And so that was the first time that I really used digital to drive something and to promote something. Yeah, those were like very early on, the kind of roles that I had where, to your point, it was kind of like, it was that moment of, yes, people were already using the internet, but not in the way that we use it now. And so there was a lot of opportunity in terms of like getting creative with it. And it was really exciting.
That's so cool. I mean, knowing that, from my vantage point, you've done such a tremendous job of showing how effective a solid, maybe well thought out, maybe like you fought your way into the room, but from the outside looking in, it looks really confident the way that you have pivoted in your career. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give to our listeners who are kind of career pivot curious? I think that's a question I get a lot, is people who want to pursue a different path and they don't know where to begin. Where would you recommend that they start? Let's say they're working in a company.
The first question is like, do they want to stay at the company that they're at, or they're trying to do something completely different? I like to give I try to give things that are tangible to people. 2 things. The first is that my career has been driven by the things that like spark me up and get me excited. I love money, and we need money for things. And even my relationship to money has changed a lot now in my late 30s. A lot of us, if you come from an immigrant family, maybe first gen, if you live in a city, there's expenses. Money is a driver, but usually is because you're on survival mode. But that's maybe for a different podcast. But I will say that's like, I understand that, I would acknowledge that, because that was always in the back of my mind. However, the way that I moved in my career has always been, does this game get me excited? And if the answer is no, then that's probably not the job for me, or the company for me, or the people for me. Because sometimes you might be, you might say yes to a job that's at a startup. So you don't really know the people, and you don't really know the evolution of where the thing is going to end, because it could start as one thing and 3 months from now, it's a completely different company. But there has to be something within the umbrella of the brand, the founders, the people, the actual job, the purpose that is a driver for me, that makes me go, yes, this is something that I want to be a part of. So going back to the money thing and money being a driver in terms of like survival, I think that a lot of work needs to be done there. So that if you are trying to pivot, if you are curious about pivoting in your career, you are not doing things from a place of fear. Because if you are doing things from a place of fear, then you're never really making a choice based on like the thing that you actually want, based on the thing that actually sparks you up. And so you have to sit with that.
I had a guest, Mary Conley, who's an executive coach, and she spoke about that specifically. If you aren't honest with yourself about the importance of the financial picture, or your priority is on title, then you take something in, in that lesser state, you've not been honest with yourself, you're not going to feel motivated, or maybe you're going to be really stressed financially and feel like you need to, pick up a second job or take something on the side, and you're not able to give it your all. Then you're doing too many things and you're not doing any of them well. And so I think like just having those sincere conversations about, your financial picture, like taking a pay cut is always something that I'm like, is there any way you can avoid it? Of course. Yeah. But if it is, an opportunity that you've saved for or that you've planned for and you feel like you can do it, absolutely. But if you put yourself in a situation where you are taking steps backwards financially, and it's going to increase your anxiety or your stress, or the way that you spend your time will not be as balanced, that is a huge consideration that I think a lot of times I disagree with when others coach that way of like, take a pay cut. Like if it's your dream job, like that might not be feasible, and certainly wasn't for me. Like I didn't have a plan B. I didn't have a fallback. I didn't have parents who were going to bankroll my, bad decision until I made it right again. Like I just was on my own. So, and if you're relating to that too, I mean, I think that there's something to be said about a lot of people who listen to the show are also in that situation where they didn't have an option to like say, okay, let me just take a gap year for, my parents are going to pay my rent, my phone. I'm good. I'm just going to like figure it out. Maybe I'll go to business school. Like that was not an option.
That is not an option here either. That's why I'm nodding my head, because I'm an only child, Dominican mother. I've probably made more money than my mother has ever seen in her life. And that is both sad, and also I feel really proud of the amount of work that I've done and the amount of support that she has given me. She has been able to support me to the best of her ability. So I totally agree. So yes, like really honest conversations with yourself, and then knowing like, what are the stakes here? Right? Like, yes, look at your financials. Yes, look at like, where are you emotionally at this moment, right? What can you handle? Do you have a toolkit for like when things get really rocky and like you're feeling anxious because you're working through this new thing, right? Because being a beginner is really fucking hard and is gonna trigger the shit out of you. So it's almost like taking an inventory. Because I did not take that sabbatical just willy-nilly. I wasn't just like, oh yeah, I am not a fly by the seat of my pants person.
And I was surprised to see you were taking the gap year. I was like, oh, okay, like go off. But like, I mean, those are the things that like put me like not at ease. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so type A. I'm trying to relax, but like it's hard. And you said letting go. And I was like, oh, that's been like my message these last few months have been let go.
It's hard. It's hard when you've created safety for yourself. And again, it can be tied to like the way you grew up or like all the things, right? Because it's always like you open one, you double click on one tab and it opens 30,000 other tabs. So like, this is not, this is not like light work. I think that pivoting in my career, sometimes opportunities just arose being at the right time, at the right moment. Right. And saying yes, even if I didn't have everything figured out. And that happens sometimes. And if that does, that's beautiful. And I want that for you. That's wonderful. And other times it has to be more thoughtful, more strategic, more of that pause, which again feels really uncomfortable because if you are already thinking about a pivot, chances are that you've been really unhappy with whatever you're doing for a while. So the urgency now is like triple the amount. And you're like, if I don't get out of here right now, I'm going to explode. And so your job is to like pause and be like, okay, like maybe quitting tomorrow is not an option because you know what? I only have enough money for the next 3 months. So I think like, being really, really honest with yourself about those things is important. And that is what's the word I'm looking for? That is a exercise that I had to do, that I continue to do, because I'm not working full time right now. Right. And then there's bills to pay and there's things to be done. Right. So I'm not over here being like, yeah, just take a year sabbatical and like live, love, laugh, even though I do love living, loving and laughing. But this was something that like has been in the works for a while. I think that one of the things I will say for myself is for many, 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 many years, I was almost like militant about the way that I saved money. And I would be lying if I said that it was because I knew 10 years from then that I was going to take a sabbatical, but there was just like something about it that was like, you know, let's be smart about this. And this is why I'm so, so thankful to past Yari, because I would not be able to be where I'm at right now and like take a pause and really be choosy with the next work that I want to do if she had not busted her ass and like been militant about the way that she saved. So if you're thinking about a pivot, think about your future self. Like, what does that person need so that they're not anxious, so that you can pay the rent, so that you know, are able to pause, like whatever that composition is for you, think about that person and then work backwards as to like, okay, what do I need? If I want to leave this company in the next 6 months, what do I need to do in the next 6 months? And then commit to that. But be willing to be flexible because life is still going to happen. Things are still going to come up. And sometimes, you know, you might be like, well, this is happening in the next 6 months. And guess what? Maybe it takes 9. And like, be patient with that, right? Now, if you're like, absolutely not, I need to leave tomorrow, only you know best. Like, I don't know. I personally don't know you. Like, we haven't worked together. Again, I'm talking to the audience. So like, I don't know you the way that you know you. And this goes back to like really sitting with yourself and getting to know yourself and being honest with yourself and like being the observer of your own thoughts, because those things lead you to be able to practice discernment. Those things lead you to be able to like know yourself in a way where you're like, actually, I do know what the best choice is right now. I need to leave right now. Or actually, if I do these 3 things, I can hold off for another 6 months, save that money, invest it, do whatever I need to do so that Ashley from 6 months from now can like breathe easy. And instead of stressing about how do I pay this rent, I can focus my time on building that new website, going on those meetings, you know, pursuing whatever certification I need so that I can become an engineer. So it's like, how do you set yourself up for success? And like, you have to take that inventory. You have to have that honest conversation with yourself. And I was going to say about people that do fly by the seat of their pants, I admire some of that, because if you are truly living boldly and you are trying to pivot, that requires some risk taking. It's just never going to be like safe enough unless you come from like generational money, which most of us don't.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to know, or like mentally start prepping that like inevitably there will be some risk taking here, and that's probably going to be hard, and that's probably going to like shake you up a little bit, you know? And so again, it's like, what's in your toolkit? Is it, when that happens, I need to go for a walk? Is it, you know, coloring? Is it whatever? Is it calling the best friend? Like, you really set yourself up for success, however that looks. And I don't think a lot of us are methodical about it in that way. One, because there's so much shit happening every day. Let's just look at the news, right? There's so much stuff that we're taking in. A lot of people are working minimum wage jobs. Like, there isn't like time, and time is what you need to really be able to like do the pause, do the, you know, whatever. So that is also something that I want to acknowledge, because in many ways that feels like a privilege, and I hate that for us. I think that not having a moment to really like disperse the mind and to, again, to sit with yourself and all those things, that fucking sucks. And I think that if we had more of that, if there was less distraction, less numbing, less escapism, and we were able to really like tap into ourselves, I think a lot of things would be a lot different, you know? People wouldn't be exhausted all the time.
Yeah. I feel like, you know, it's interesting because I want to get into knowing that like you're navigating into launching your own brand. I mean, even before that, like you're really grounded and, you know, you've obviously done the work to get there. You're also like very stylish. You're cool. You just like have a vibe. Like it's shoddy. Like, yes,
you.
absolutely.
So cute.
But I think there's friendliness. And there's also this lack of judgment that comes from, I feel like, people being able to ask you questions about the industry, about, you know, confidence and things like that. And so, you know, I want to talk about what you're up to, what your offerings are. But first I'm going to ask you, like, did you have anybody like what you're offering for you in past work environments?
I think in a official capacity now, I believe that you can learn from anybody. You can learn from the person that works at the front desk, from the cleaning person. You can learn from the intern. And yes, your boss, as you hopefully, right? They have some knowledge. Sometimes we get stuck with people that we're like, how did you even get this job, my guy? But I can't say that I've had someone. I'm like in my head is like making sure. I can't say that I've had someone in my life that I can really be like, this person was like a mentor, or this person was, this person was a mentor in a way that was like, this is what I'm doing for you. You know, I think I've had people that I can go to for questions, but not someone that was really invested in like my growth as a person in my career consistently, or and again, in a capacity where like, we both know what this relationship is. It is this thing. So no.
And I think when we don't have something, it actually, that absence makes us go, oh yeah, look, wow, there's a gap here. I can't be the only person experiencing that lack of, let me do something about it. Yeah. I mean, you know, let's talk a little bit about like some of your offerings, you know, one of which is confidence coaching, which I absolutely love. I think it's, you know, you describe it as like a transformative journey. You know, you're, you know, in this scenario, a coach, like you got certified as a life coach, which I think is awesome. But you also talk about like looking at like this kind of looking in as well as practicing out. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your theory around this and, you know, what might be an ideal client for you in confidence coaching.
Oh my God, such a good question. So this is all very new for me. I just got certified last year. But I've been doing a lot of like community work for a long time. And yes, going back to what you were saying about mentorship and all that, or just like guidance. I think for a while I was like, why do people need a life coach? And then I was like, let me pause here. And it's like, not everyone has the confidence that you have. Not everyone is built the way that you are. And that is not to say that I have everything figured out and I'm perfect. No, that's not what I'm saying. But I think that a lot of times when we are really good at something, we're like, what do you mean? Like, it's hard? Like, why don't you just go up to the guy and like ask him to dance? And it's like, that's not how everybody feels, you know? And I will say one of the things that I learned at a previous company was precisely this, which was, I remember we were discussing membership and how we had different people in the community. And I was like, well, we were talking about an event. I was like, well, wouldn't you just blah, 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 blah. And one of the women in the room was like, you would do that, but we have to think about people that are introverts or people who aren't as comfortable in those like social settings. And that really is something that I've taken with me, where whenever I'm doing work with people, I'm like, who are we forgetting here? Right? Even if it's a brand campaign, even if it's like something that's supposed to be fun and silly, but I'm like, who are we missing in this conversation? And like, do I have enough information to be, you know, an advocate for that group, or do I need to tap into people that are in that group? Often I think the latter is always good, regardless of how much information you have. So in terms of this work of coaching and confidence, I really want to be able to help people tap into that part of themselves. And if they don't have that, if they're scared to like tap into that, I want to explore with them like why that is, and like how do we create smaller, tangible things that you could work towards, so that you can, and it's going to sound really basic, but so that you can speak confidence into yourself if there's no one around you that does that. Because for me, the one thing that my mom absolutely got right was that my mother has always spoken confidence into me. And again, going back to like lived experiences, you're like, well, isn't that what everybody dealt with? And it's like, no, right? And so like, if you don't have that confidence, because I have a surplus of it, I want to be able to like pour that into people in a way that is sustainable to me, but also in a way that like gets their engine going, right? It's like, I'm going to give you a little bit of my gas and I want you to build on that. And I think that if we have, you know, people that are more confident in themselves in a way that also has, like intellectual humility tied into it, and that there is spirituality. I hate to throw this word because I feel like it's so overused, but it's like, it's more holistic and it's more sustainable. And it's not just like you're having this moment when things are good that you're like, I'm feeling really confident, but it's like, you could carry that with you when you are making that career pivot, when you are, in that relationship that you've been wanting to be in for a really long time, right? So that you do not self-sabotage, so that you do not, even if your instinct is to fall into, you know, your default mode, you're like, oh, wait a minute. Like I have this toolkit. I have these tactics to be able to work through this. And so like those things are really important to me, because like those are things that I do in my life. And I've seen the kind of success that I've had with the way that I'm able to work through things. You know, you asked like what my ideal coachee would be, like client. And I don't have one. I thought that it would be, you know, certainly women, because that is, I think, my audience. But in my training, I had a guy as one of in my training, I had to do a certain amount of hours where I coached folks. And so I had 6 people. I was surprised that I had over 50 people sign up in 24 hours for this like free coaching. Only one guy signed up, which I was like,
that
okay,
is
I have
that's
to
humbling.
Like, I was like, I have to like make sure I get this guy in. Hopefully he says yes. But I was surprised by like the age range of people. Like the women I thought would be maybe like around my age, but I had women from like 19 to like 50s that had signed up. And I was like, oh, wow. And again, this goes back to like, you can learn from you could be student teacher is like a way of life. Right. So that was one. And two, people originally signed up for things and, you know, people were like, I want to be more confident at work, or I want to pivot on, you know, my relationship. And then after like 2 sessions, it was like, oh no, actually I need to work on this other thing first. So like being able to use my curiosity to, go on this like adventure with people is really exciting for me. And then going back to like the experience with the one client that was a guy, I really loved working with him. And he, you know, it was like a completely different experience. So I don't have like one specific type of client. I think that it'll be interesting to see like the people that do end up coming to me now that I've like launched this. And I think naturally there'll be like the niche will pop up. But what I originally again thought was it was going to be like woman, maybe 24 to 34. And like specifically maybe for career or like, again, dating, but it really has ran the gamut. And in just that, in just that experience of like doing the call out to get people to sign up for some of my training, it's interesting to see where people need confidence in their life. I think there's like the most obvious places that we think of. But then there's other pockets of things where people, just don't feel as confident in. And I'm just like, okay, let's work through that. How do we work through that? And also like for me to learn, right? Like, again, you learn from everybody. And I feel like in every session with the clients that I had, I would come out of there just being like, oh shit, like, let me sit with that for myself. So no ideal client, all are welcomed. That just made me think of years ago when I read Harry Potter. I took the test to see what house I was in, and I really wanted to be Gryffindor. I think like most people, unless I think Slytherins usually are like, no, I want to be a Slytherin, but I really want to be Gryffindor. Anyways, your girl is a Hufflepuff, and Hufflepuff, all people are welcomed in the house. And that is truly, I think, the way that I just am in general in terms of like my friends groups, the places that I, just like all the things that I do. So I am not surprised that in terms of clients, I'm just like, all are welcomed. And we'll figure out if we like each other and if we want to work with each other. But I'm interested in really helping you unlock the thing that's like holding you back from being your most authentic self, and figuring out what steps can we take to do that in a way that's comfortable for you, feasible for you, sustainable for you. And the last thing I'll add about coaching is when I told my therapist that I was going to do the certification, she's like, why don't you just go to school and become like a psychologist? And I was like, absolutely not. At least not in this iteration. And I'm like, because one of the things that I really enjoy about coaching is that it is focused on the present and it is focused on action items. And I don't think that is like as linear as you would want it to be. I think because, again, growth is not, it's like a curved bell. But I like the idea of working with someone for a limited amount of time, getting things done, and like sending you off. Because at the end of the day, like, this is your life. It is meant to be lived. And I want to hold your hand for a little bit so that you, again, have that confidence that maybe you didn't have before. But ultimately, the like secret sauce for confidence is like, you just have to do the thing and you have to keep showing up for it. And then eventually you look back and you're like, oh my God, I'm really good at this thing. It no longer scares me. And the only person that can do that is you. That's the deal. I
mean, thank goodness, like the only person you get to be is you. So you've got to do the thing for yourself too.
Yes.
It's funny you mentioned about like being asked to become a therapist. I actually have that in like my coaching contracts. It's like, I'm not a psychotherapist, and like, just, I'm a coach, and like, I'm also not a financial advisor, like, just making sure we're aligned.
Yes.
Because I do think that sometimes people conflate, and I think that there's, I'll say, like, different practices that feed different areas of our life. Like, I think therapy is a really great thing. I also think like, sometimes like you need a break, or you need to change therapists, or you need, just like coaches, like some coach might be really great for you at one point in your life. And then you might realize that like, okay, I'm ready for another person. And I think that, for me is like, have more than one coach. Have a coach that you can call on when it's like, I'm negotiating an offer, and you have a coach you can call on when you're like, I just lost, all confidence because, all of my clients are doing different things. I thought they were renewing, whatever that is. And so I just think that like there's such an opportunity there to see the difference, and try it. Like, what's the worst that happens? You have a session, you're like, oh, that wasn't a vibe. It's all like dating. It's all chemistry. It's all figuring out if like we're meant to work together. So, no harm in that. What are some of your, favorite brands right now? Like, who's doing business right in your eyes? Because I think you have a really amazing perspective on, community, and you've been in these, roles where you're looking at partnerships. And I think there's a lot of companies that don't get it right. But is there anyone that like is exciting to you right now that, just you want to point out?
I mean, you as an HR person, as a coach, an executive coach, I'm sure you're seeing all of like the DI things that are happening of companies removing, So I'm like, getting it right. I'm an astrology girly, and I'm just like, this is not going to last. Like, it's already been this way for a really long time. I'm like, it's the changes of the guards are happening astrologically. So like, Godspeed. But who is getting it right? Duolingo is having a moment, and they're leaning into, I love when a brand leans into humor. Like, that for me is my favorite thing. And so whoever's running the Duolingo account is like extra spicy, extra funny. Like, there was a tweet that I saw where I think it was like the official account for like the UK that was like, we're no longer going to learn new languages or something. I don't know. And Duolingo was like, learning languages is important for you, colonizer, or something. The point is that they called that account a colonizer, and I was like, this is very spicy. But then they've been doing this whole collaboration with Dr. Miami on TikTok that I was like, I would have never thought this was going to be on my bingo card, but here we are. And it's actually really, really funny. So I do like when brands lean into like humor and don't take themselves so seriously, because doing community is really hard. And, you know, as someone that has worked in those spaces, you're never going to please everybody. Inevitably, something will go wrong. And so you're always having to like dot your I's and cross your T's. And so I think like for brands who want to get in that pocket is like, you have to be really intentional and you have to be committed to it. Otherwise, like stick to your lane of just being like light and funny and like silly, and doing TikToks. So anyways, Duolingo is the one that comes to mind because I've just seen a lot of funny things coming out of their account. It gives a little bit of like a sigh of relief amongst all the horrible news that we're constantly seeing. I will give a shout out to two of my friends that have brands that are based in community. One is my friend, Deborah Santeria, and her partner, Bree, who have La Nueva Link, which is focused on Latina just creatives. And I just really love them and all the work that they've done. And then my friend, who is the founder of the Creative Collective, who do Culture Con. They just announced like some really cool things, projects that they're doing. And like, she's really interesting because, she was like the head of PR, I think at, over at Bravo for a really long time, very successful, and decided to part ways so that she could pursue building this company and being the CEO of this company. So those two, but the brand is like based in community. You know what I mean? It's like community first and then everything else afterwards. I've had the Grow Mop for a really long time, and I was just like, okay, what is the next iteration of this? And can I take this community along for the ride? Which is really scary because often you're like, I don't know if people are going to like this other thing that I'm going to do. Right. And it's funny because I went to an event in Brooklyn where Lauren Ash, who's the founder of Girl and Numb, was talking, and I asked her, like, how are you pivoting that community? And she gave some tips. But ultimately it was just kind of like, you just kind of got to do it. And like, whoever's going to, you know, roll with you, they will. And like and whoever's like, yeah, this is not for me, you got to like make peace with that. And so again, going back to like surrendering and not being like, this needs to be perfect the way that I roll this out. So so Blanco Studios came to me while I was in my sabbatical last year in Europe, because removing myself from the US, truly, I feel like a lot of like the creative blockages that I've felt since 2019, like lifted, and all of these ideas were coming to me. Like the coaching thing came to me. I also offer tarot reading, which I've been doing tarot for me and my friends for a really long time. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take this even more seriously now. There's like, you know, my Substack, I really enjoy writing. There's 2 book ideas that I have. There's like, I have like an ongoing list, and I'm like, where would this live? Because some of this stuff makes sense with each other, but some of it doesn't. And so I'm like, what tent do I need to build that's big enough for all the things? And so that's where like Blanco Studios came from, because I want to have space to, one, play, and 2, allow myself to pivot as many times as I want, you know? And that for me is really, really important to not, you know, the way that I grew up, my mother is very much a like hippy dippy type of person. And there's so many things now as an adult that I appreciate that she did for me growing up. But there's other things that I've had to make peace with. And one of them was that in many ways I had to self-parent because she was so like easy breezy cover girl. And so I gave myself a lot of parameters. So you're talking to someone that like grew up with giving themselves a lot of structure and a lot of discipline. Like sometimes I would want to like go do something. It's like, no, we're not allowed to do that right now. We need to do this other thing that's really responsible. And because of that, especially in my 20s, which part of it was because I was in my 20s, sometimes when I needed to like release some steam, I would really, go off the fucking rails. And so again, now in this iteration of my life, I'm like, I don't want to do that. I really care about balance. And I really care about giving myself enough room to be playful, to fail, to figure things out, while also not losing, the learnings that I've had from being someone that is structured and someone who is disciplined, right? There has to be room for both. And so Blanco Studios, my hope for it, my wish for it is that it allows me to do both of those things, right? Which is ultimately be a full person, right? Not just like 25% of Jari, but that I get to be 100% of Jari every day. And that might look different this year. It might look different next year, but it's the sandbox is big enough for me to be like, so many things I want to do. Like under coaching, I also want to do a retreat in Spain because I loved traveling there. I love spending time there. And I had so many DMs from women last summer being like, I've never traveled by myself. How do I do that? It just looks so much fun. And I was like, well, if I give women, and men are welcome, but this is for women, if I give women a bridge that connects them to this life of adventure, where maybe the first 3 days you're at this retreat, but you stay for a week, right? Then I'm giving you a starting point so that you don't feel scared, so that you do have confidence in the things that you want to go explore.
Yeah.
So those are like the ways that I'm thinking about things. It's like, how am I bridging gaps for people? So that then you could go off, fly away from the nest and go explore and have your own adventures and your own experiences and your own heartache. Because then that allows you to be a full version of yourself.
That's so important. And I mean, second to last question, because I could just keep going.
Ask me all the questions.
Where can people go to learn more about you, to sign up for coaching, to have some tarot read, all of the above, learn about Blanco Studios? Where should they go? We'll put it in the show notes too, but
yeah, of course.
Let's promote it.
Website is yariblanco.com. That's YARIBLANCO.com. Very easy to navigate, very to the point. But if you're just like, I just want to know the offerings, literally click on offerings. And then you can find me on socials, on Instagram. I mostly use Instagram and TikTok. And that's going to be the Yari Blanco. So same name, just THE at the front. And the Girl Mob will be transitioning into Blanco Studios, in the next few weeks. So if you follow the Girl Mob now, which is THE Girl MOB, you will be seeing that transition happening as well. And if you're interested more in my musings about life, and you're like, this person sounds intelligent and interesting, you could find me on Substack. Same thing, Yari Blanco. Pretty easy. If you just Google my name, all of this will work. It will come up. I'm proud of my SEO.
Yeah. So what is one final thought that you would like to leave our listeners with today?
Do it even if you're scared. Which I know is really hard in practice.
I love that.
But do it even if you're really scared. Like, pull at that string. Whatever the thing is that's calling you, do not ignore that. Because it's only going to get louder. And ultimately that ends up showing up in your body. And we want you to be healthy. We want you to be happy. So if it's something that's calling you, say yes to it. And you will see that solutions will arise. Information will arise. Clarity will arise. But do not say no to the thing that scares you, because that's where the growth happens. So say yes.
I love that. And may we all say a little more yes in 2024.
Yeah.
Yari, thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing your thoughts. And I mean, so much of your experiences are so inspiring to me. Like, I'm really, really happy that we could do this.
Thank you for asking me. I was, I think I told you this over email, but one of the things that I really want moving forward is to get back into having conversations and, facilitating things. And that comes along with the coaching as well. Because I did a lot of that prior to 2020. And so you asking me just like warmed my heart, and I was like, oh, this is going to be perfect. So I really appreciate you taking time and asking such good questions. Thank you.
Yeah, this was really, really fulfilling for me as well. So when it goes both ways, it's a win-win-win.
Absolutely.
This has been another episode of Don't Fuck This Up, the podcast answering the ultimate question, how the fuck did you land that cool job? I'm your host, Lauren Alvarez, and we will talk to you next week. Don't Fuck This Up is a podcast written, produced, and edited by Lauren Alvarez. New episodes dropping every Wednesday. Be sure to follow, rate, and review this and every episode. And until next week, please keep it together and try your best not to fuck this up.